Before streaming, before endless kids' channels, Saturday mornings felt like a weekly holiday. You'd wake to that bright test card hum, maybe the smell of toast drifting in from the kitchen, and wait for the telly to come alive. Swap shop, going live, tissoirs, loud, silly, messy. The house was half asleep except for the living room. Cereal clattered into bowls, a sibling fought for the best spot on the sofa, and presenters in jumpers shouted over each other about competitions you'd never win. Everything looked slightly fuzzy on the screen, but it didn't matter. That blur is how the 80s looked anyway. Warm and noisy. By midday, it was all over. The cartoons stopped, the theme tune played out, and suddenly the room felt too quiet. You might wander outside, kick a football, or start taping songs off the radio. But for a few hours every week, those shows made every kid in Britain feel like part of the same big daft club. Every school seemed to have one. A little hatch that opened at break, the smell of sugar and crisps spilling into the corridor. You'd queue with a few coins sweating in your hand, trying to work out how far 10 pence could stretch. The shelves behind the counter were a rainbow, flying saucers, blackjacks, sherbet fountains, Highland toffee, maybe a few dusty Wham bars stuck to their wrappers. If you were lucky, they'd stocked Panda Pops too, those fizzy little bottles that tasted more of color than flavor. There was a rhythm to it. The rush when the bell went, the panic when you couldn't decide, the pride of walking away with a paper bag rustling in your pocket. The teachers pretended to disapprove, but everyone knew they nipped down there too. By the time lessons started again, your tongue was bright blue, and your hands smelled of sugar dust. You'd already started plotting what to get tomorrow. It wasn't about the sweets, really. It was about that tiny bit of freedom, a few minutes that felt like yours. Walking into a video shop in the 80s felt a bit like sneaking into another world. The air was thick with plastic and popcorn, and every wall was lined with those chunky VHS cases, glossy covers promising more than the films ever delivered. You'd wander the aisles for ages, tilting your head to read the spines. Horror tapes always caught your eye first, with covers that looked way too grown up. Some had stickers covering half the picture. 18 certificate in bold red, which only made them more tempting. The ritual was always the same. You'd argue with your mates over what to pick, maybe settle on something with explosions or a talking animal, and then hand it over at the counter. The clerk would open the case, check for the tape inside, and slap a little sticker on the box. "Be kind, rewind." Everyone ignored it. Half the time, the player at home chewed the tape anyway. You'd have to wind it back with a pen, cursing while the telly flickered blue. But even that was part of it, the sense that you were handling something fragile and special. Streaming's easy, sure, but it doesn't smell like that mix of dust, plastic, and weekend excitement. You could smell them long before the bell went. That thick, steamy smell drifting out of the canteen. A mix of gravy, boiled veg, and something sweet underneath. By the time you got there, the windows were fogged up and the floor felt sticky under your shoes. The dinner ladies ran the place like clockwork. You slid your tray along, waiting your turn, praying it wasn't liver day. There'd be lumps of mash that held their shape like cement, peas rolling everywhere, and puddings that looked suspicious, but always tasted all right. Cornflake tart with custard was the saving grace. Nobody talked about allergies or options or portions. You ate what you were given, or you sat there till you did. And somehow, between the noise and the smell and the chipped plates, it worked. Everyone's memory of those dinners is the same. A bit grim, a bit comforting, and strangely hard to forget. Even now, you catch that faint whiff of cabbage and gravy somewhere, and you're right back in that queue, tray in hand, hoping for something edible. After school or on a damp weekend, you'd wander into the arcades just to see what was new. The light hit you first. Reds, blues, flashing yellows bouncing off every shiny surface. Rows of machines blinked back like they were alive. You didn't need much money, just a pocket of loose change and a bit of time to waste. The older kids hogged the good machines, elbows planted firm, eyes locked on the screens. The rest of us drifted between them. Slot machines, pinball, that old coin pusher that always looked ready to spill. The air was warm and heavy, full of beeping noises and cigarette smoke. You'd feed in a coin, win 2 back, then lose 5. Nobody cared. It was about the buzz, the feeling that something might happen. Outside could be raining sideways, but inside those lights, it didn't matter. Walking home later, hands empty, the sound still rang in your ears. That steady electronic heartbeat that followed you out into the dark. Every summer seemed to last longer back then. Whole families packed into cars with too much luggage and not enough patience, crawling toward the coast in traffic that never moved. Windows down, radio humming, crisps passed round to keep the peace. By the time you reached the sea, everything smelled of chips and salt. The first sight of the beach always hit the same way. Gray skies or sunshine didn't matter. Buckets, spades, windbreakers flapping in the breeze, someone already queuing for ice cream. The sand was never quite warm, the sea never exactly blue. But you went in anyway, squealing as the cold hit your legs. Parents sat behind folded newspapers, pretending not to watch. Somewhere nearby the arcade buzzed, and the gulls screamed over the smell of vinegar. Evenings meant caravan parks or creaky B&Bs. Wet towels hanging everywhere, someone trying to tune in the telly with a bent coat hanger, the sound of rain on the roof. Cheap entertainment nights where dads got roped into silly games, kids clutching glow sticks, mums laughing until they cried. Those holidays weren't fancy, but they stitched families together in a way that stuck. Years later, you'd still find sand in the seams of old bags and swear it came from that same trip. Every neighborhood had one, usually run by the same family for decades. The kind of place that smelled faintly of newsprint and mint. You'd nip in for milk, end up leaving with crisps and a comic. The bell above the door gave a soft jingle that somehow belonged to the sound of the street itself. Shelves were close together, half the chocolate bars slightly melted in summer. Behind the counter, an old till clattered open with that solid metal sound you don't hear anymore. Kids memorized the prices like currency exchange rates. 10p for a can of Tizer, 20p for Space Raiders, 5p for a Freddo back when they actually were. If you were short a penny or two, most shopkeepers waved it off. They knew you. They'd seen you come in since you could barely reach the counter. Sometimes the lights flickered. Sometimes the bread was a day old, but none of that mattered. It was part of the daily rhythm. Popping in after school, saying hello, passing the same faces. You didn't realize it was vanishing until the day it turned into a takeaway or a nail bar. Now and then, walking past one that's still hanging on, you catch that old smell, a mix of sweets, dust, and newspapers, and for a second, you're right back there with a pound coin that could buy half the shop. There was something about the sound of a cassette clicking into place. That tiny clunk before the hiss started. Every bedroom had a stack of them somewhere, scrawled labels in biro, half-recorded songs taped off the radio. You'd sit there on a Sunday night, finger on the play record buttons, waiting for the DJ to stop talking before the chorus came in. Mixtapes meant something back then. You made one for a mate, or someone you liked, or maybe just for the bus ride to school. The order mattered, the pauses mattered, and when the tape finally stretched or snapped, you wound it back in with a pencil and kept using it anyway. The Walkman changed everything. Suddenly, you could take your music outside, on buses, through parks, lying in bed pretending to sleep. Headphones that leaked sound so everyone around you could half hear what you were listening to. Albums weren't just files or playlists. They had weight. You saved up for them, studied the covers, read the lyrics, played the whole thing from start to finish. The crackle, the rewind, the fading hiss, all of it part of the music itself. Even now, when a song from that time plays, you can almost hear the tape spooling underneath it. Uneven, familiar, alive in a way streaming will never quite match. Evenings settled around the television. The lights went down, the curtains half drawn, and the set gave off that faint hum you could hear if the room was quiet enough. Someone always claimed the best seat. Someone else worked the buttons on the front panel because the remote had gone missing again. There was a rhythm to the week. Certain shows you didn't dare miss. Only Fools and Horses, The Two Ronnies, Blind Date, whatever the family could all agree on. You'd eat off trays on your laps, plates balanced dangerously close to the edge, the room filled with the smell of chips and gravy or a reheated shepherd's pie. Adverts were part of the fun. Nobody muted them, they just shouted over them or sang along. When the program came back on, you'd hear a quick shh, and everyone fell silent again. For that half hour, it felt like the house stopped moving. When the credits rolled, nobody rushed off. The telly stayed on a bit longer, the screen glowing blue while someone put the kettle on. It wasn't about the program by then. It was about being there together, all facing the same flickering light. Break time was its own little universe. The whistle blew and suddenly the place came alive. Footballs flying, skipping ropes slapping against tarmac, someone trading stickers behind the bike sheds. You didn't think about lessons or homework. For 20 minutes, this was your whole world. The ground was always slightly damp, no matter the weather. Coats half-zipped, shoes scuffed to bits, someone always scraping a knee and insisting they were fine. Games had their own rules that changed daily. No headers, no touching the wall, next goal wins. Nobody wrote them down, but everyone knew. You could measure the years by the crazes that swept through. Conkers one term, yo-yos the next, then marbles, pogs, football cards, skipping, British bulldog until it got banned again. Every new game felt like the biggest thing in the world until it vanished overnight. And then there were the quieter corners, kids swapping crisps, sitting on the benches, talking about music or TV or who liked who. Teachers kept an eye from the doorway, but mostly let it run itself. It was chaos, but it was our chaos. And every scratch on your knee or scuff on your shoe felt like proof you'd been part of it. Every family had a car that seemed permanently on the edge of breaking down. Faded paint, the smell of petrol and warm plastic, cassette tapes rattling in the glove box. Getting in meant settling arguments about who sat where. Nobody wanted the middle seat. Everyone fought for the window. Long drives felt endless. You'd stare out at hedgerows sliding past, counting pylons or trying to spot cows that looked like they were smiling. Parents up front arguing with the map. Dad insisting he knew the way. Mum pointing at signs he'd already missed. There was no GPS voice to blame, just the silence that followed another wrong turn. The back seats were their own little ecosystem. Sticky fingers from boiled sweets, crisp packets on the floor, someone half asleep against the window leaving a patch of fogged glass. The radio faded in and out between stations, and whenever a good song came on, everyone stopped talking. Sometimes the car overheated. Sometimes you got stuck behind a tractor for miles. But when you finally pulled into a lay-by for chips or ice cream, it felt like victory. Those trips were noisy, cramped, occasionally miserable, and somehow still some of the best memories there are. When the new Argos catalog came out, the whole house seemed to stop for a bit. It'd land on the coffee table with a thud, thick enough to use as a step stool, and before long everyone was flipping through the pages. The toy section always ended up a bit crumpled from sticky fingers and wishful thinking. You'd sit there circling things in biro, convinced that folding the corner of the page made it official somehow. The pictures were hypnotic. Shiny plastic toys glowing under perfect lighting, smiling kids who looked like they had everything. Even if you knew most of it was out of reach, it didn't stop you looking. Going to the actual shop felt like an event. Filling out those little slips with the blue pens chained to the counter, sliding them under the glass, and then watching the numbers tick up on the screen until yours appeared. When the box finally came out from the back, it always felt bigger than you expected. The catalog stayed around long after you'd finished with it. You'd find it under the sofa or in your room months later, corners bent, pages torn. You'd flick through it again anyway just to see what you used to want. Somehow, it made the waiting part of the fun. The school bus had its own rules and none of them were written down. You knew exactly where you were allowed to sit, who you could talk to, and which seats were completely off-limits. The back row was sacred. Loud music, louder voices, a wall of blazers and backpacks. Every journey started the same way. Cold mornings, breath fogging the windows, the smell of wet coats and cheap deodorant. Someone always had a packet of crisps open before the bus even left the gates. The driver pretended not to notice half the noise coming from behind. There was always a bit of drama. Someone arguing over a seat, someone else leaning too far out the window, or the older kids blasting a cassette player until the batteries died. By the time you reached school, the windows were steamed up. The floor was littered with sweet wrappers, and your voice was half gone from shouting. But you stepped off buzzing, like you'd already lived half a day before the lessons even started. It wasn't comfortable, or quiet, or clean, but it was freedom. 30 minutes of noise and nonsense that somehow made the rest of the day bearable. You always heard it before you saw it, that distant tune echoing down the street. Sometimes green sleeves, sometimes something cheerier, always just out of reach. Kids would stop mid-sentence, heads snapping up like dogs hearing a whistle. Coins were hunted from kitchen drawers, pockets turned inside out, and somehow everyone ended up at the curb at the same time. The van itself was always a bit battered. Stickers peeling, a poster of a 99 cone half sun-bleached. Inside, the freezers hissed with cold air, and the man serving barely looked up, already halfway through another order. You'd rattle off what you wanted, trying not to change your mind as you spoke. There was a rhythm to it, the soft whip of the machine, the crunch of the flake going in, the heavy drizzle of raspberry sauce. Sometimes the cone was lopsided or melting before you even got it, but nobody cared. You stood on the pavement with ice dripping down your wrist, trying to eat faster than the sun could ruin it. And just as suddenly as it appeared, the van was gone again. Music fading down the road, leaving behind a few dropped sprinkles and sticky fingers. You never quite knew when it would come back, but that was part of the magic. Saturday mornings always started with that sentence, "We're going into town." It wasn't optional. You got dragged along, half awake, coat zipped up wrong, the smell of toast still hanging on your jumper. The bus ride felt endless, your legs sticking to the plastic seats while the windows fogged up from everyone's breath. town itself had a pulse on Saturdays. Market stalls shouting prices, the smell of chips and perfume mixing in the air, buskers outside Woolworths hammering away at the same 3 songs. Mum had a list that never ended: bread, tights, something for dinner, and somehow still found time to stop at every window on the way. If you were lucky, you got a reward, a pick-and-mix bag from Woolies or a sausage roll from Greg's. You'd trail behind, clutching it like treasure, trying not to drop anything while she compared tins of soup. The world felt huge then, and loud, and a bit overwhelming. By the time you got home, the bags dug red marks into your fingers and your feet ached. But the day had that comfortable sort of tiredness to it. You'd tip everything out on the kitchen table, the smell of the high street still clinging to your clothes, and for some reason it always felt like a proper Saturday.